Hello, I'm Derek Walker, the pastor of the Oxford Bible Church. We're on a series on the temples of God, and last time we looked at the Garden of Eden and how that was the original earthly temple of God in the land of Eden. And we saw that it's designed after God's heavenly temple, and so it was a temple of God because it was the place where God's presence dwelt and where man could meet with God and worship him and serve him. And of course man got cast out of the Garden of Eden, and the story of the Bible really is how God is ultimately going to restore man so that he can dwell in his heavenly temple forever in God's presence, knowing God, worshipping God, serving him as his image bearer. And that's why we read in the final chapter of the Bible, "He showed me a pure river of the water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the middle of its street, on either side of the river, was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And there will be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants will serve him in the temple of God. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads, and they'll have fellowship with him, you see, forever. And there will be no night there. They need no lamp or light of the sun, for the Lord God gives them light." The glory of God is going to fill his temple. And it says, "They shall reign forever and ever." So we will serve God, and we will rule and reign with God in the ultimate, final, heavenly temple of God. But this was pictured by Eden. And we saw that Eden existed on 3 levels of descending height, descending holiness. There was Mount Eden, the highest point, nearest God, the Holy of Holies, the source of divine life, the source of the river. And then the Garden of Eden, which was like the holy place, which was below that, and the river flowed into this garden and watered it so that the trees in the garden would bring forth wonderful fruit. And then we saw that on the east side of Eden was the outer court. And then, so the whole of Eden was like a sanctuary of God, and then the river flowed from Eden to cover the ends of the earth. Now the later temples of God contained reminders of this original temple of Eden, where God originally dwelt with man, such as the trees and flowers of the garden, which were painted all over and engraved all over these temples. These temples always had the same west-east orientation. They had the cherubim carved there. They had an altar of sacrifice in the outer court. And these, of course, the cherubim and the altar, remind us of the effect of Adam's sin. And all these features were made to reflect Eden in various ways, to show what man lost, and also to teach God's way that man is going to restore him into his presence again. So ultimately, Eden gives us a picture of us also as temples of God, because we live on 3 levels of descending holiness. Mount Eden, the high point, nearest God, the Holy of Holies, represents our spirit. The Garden of Eden, the holy place, represents man's soul, where we make our decisions between the tree of life or the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And thirdly, the east side of Eden is the outer court, corresponds to our body, our outer life. And the river of life flows from the spirit through our soul and then through our body. The fact that Eden was a temple also explains why the temple is a fundamental concept known by mankind from the very beginning, just like blood covenant. It appears in all cultures and places, so that however corrupted it's become, they all share certain key features. This is because God revealed his ultimate purpose for man from the beginning. This idea that God dwells with man. He wants to dwell with man. And his plan for man is that very thing. And so there is this concept of temple that man has understood from the beginning. The place where man dwells with God. And God's presence is manifested. The first earthly manifestation of the temple was the Temple of Eden, which is patterned after the heavenly temple, and interestingly, both are mountains, described as mountains. The massive mountain represents God's majesty, his authority, his kingdom, his holiness. And it's interesting that in the cultures of the world, in the Near East, they have a memory of a massive world mountain from where the gods ruled, and that's a memory of Mount Edom. So the existence of Mount Edom, from which flowed the river giving life to the earth, confirms that Eden was the earthly temple of God, patterned after the heavenly temple, which has a mountain from whose peak flows the river of life. And so man's original concept of a temple of God was a mountain, with God's presence dwelling most strongly at the summit, the place where God dwelt, mostly, the place of greatest holiness and authority, the throne. And this derived from the first earthly temple of Eden, which was a physical representation and copy of the heavenly temple. And so this taught that God lived in a high and holy place, and he was the source of all life and blessing, the Holy One in the Most High, and to receive this life you have to submit to him as Lord. And so Isaiah 57 says, "Thus says the High and Holy One, the lofty one, who inhabits in eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, with him who has a contrite and humble spirit, who bows before his holiness, to revive or make alive the spirit of the humble, and revive the heart of the contrite." The earthly temple of Eden also explains why ancient temples are generally shaped like mountains, like ziggurats and pyramids. Sadly, man corrupted the original revelation of God and worshipped many false gods using idols. But even when man followed after false gods, he still had a residue of divine revelation from his origins in Eden. He believed that the gods dwelt on a high place, above all, on a heavenly mountain. And that was represented, for instance, by the earthly Mount Olympus. And so they would come down onto the earthly Mount Olympus, but they lived in the heavenly mountain. This is just residual revelation. So they believed that by building an earthly temple, which was made like unto the heavenly home of the gods would come down and feel at home on your mountain temple. And therefore you could contact them. And especially if you offered up sacrifices. So the gods would presence themselves on the peak, especially when sacrifices were made. In this way, the earthly temple would be the place where the gods could dwell among men, and where man could be in the presence of God, of the God, and meet with the God, connect with the divine, and make his petitions to him, and his offerings to him. So the temple was a conduit to the heavens. And this explains why throughout the world, universally, from earliest times, temples, holy places designed to honor a God, to point to him and to attract and receive his presence and his favor, they were generally built in the form of man-made mountains. For example, pyramids, ziggurats. And of course, the most famous one of all is the Tower of Babel, which was a massive step ziggurat, with the peak being the holiest place. Now, God had told mankind to disperse and fill the earth, but in rebellion, man tried by himself to recreate the original Edenic paradise utopia by himself on his own terms, apart from God. And we read in Genesis 11:4, they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, whose top," or it's probably a ziggurat, "whose top is in the heavens." See, they want to contact the heavens. "Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." By now, the worship had been corrupted to worship of other gods. And so this was an evil thing. This was designed actually by Satan. Starting with Babel and the Tower of Babel. It was designed to become a worldwide kingdom called Babylon, ruled over by one man that was under Satan's control. Originally it was Nimrod, but ultimately it's going to be the Antichrist. And he will be under the power of Satan. And he will worship Satan. Remember, Satan offered this position to Jesus. He said, "You bow down and worship me, and I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world." But Jesus refused that offer. And God judged this manifestation of human pride at Babel, because this is man trying to do what only God can do. Only God can bring us salvation, and only God can bring the Edenic kingdom back on earth. And so he judged this manifestation of pride, which was a counterfeit of God, a counterfeit of what God is planning to do, which is to establish his mountain kingdom on the earth under Christ. And so God scattered the people by confounding their languages. He scattered them over the earth as he intended. God, you see, intends to establish his own mountain kingdom on the earth, with Christ at its head. But Satan is in competition with God. He's counterfeiting God's plan by trying to establish his own Tower of Babel, his own worldwide government upon the earth, that's erected on human pride, that's based on a false humanistic vision of utopia apart from God, and it's bound to fail. So there are two competing kingdoms right now, and the evil one is called Babylon in the scriptures. This battle will come to a head in the tribulation, when Antichrist's kingdom, Babylon, will seem to cover the earth and control the earth, but it will be destroyed by Christ when he returns to establish his worldwide kingdom on the earth. So this is why a lot of pagan temples today are built like mountains, because there's this original revelation from the Garden of Eden. And of course, all temples to false gods are corrupted counterfeits of the true temple of God. But that doesn't mean that there was no divine original from which their basic concept derived, and that in spite of the corruption involved, they may still carry some features of the original, like the mountain structure. Mankind, you see, kept a residual understanding of God's blueprint for a temple, and so they built their temples accordingly, even if the worship was misdirected to false gods. Also, of course, the devil knew the structure of heaven, and he's trying to copy that. He doesn't have any original ideas of his own, so he copies God. And for instance, he created his own spiritual kingdom with the angels in rank below him, like a pyramid, with him at the top, over his fallen angels and demons at the bottom level. And so he's also trying to build his earthly equivalent with the Antichrist on top, over a one-world government. But we don't want to be distracted by Satan's counterfeit, because in some ways a counterfeit note looks like the original. And so you wouldn't reject an original £20 note because it looked like a counterfeit. All right? You just need to forget the counterfeit and just look to see what the original revelation of God is concerning temples. We don't need to be distracted by the counterfeit, but we need to see and reclaim God's original pattern and revelation, which is that his kingdom is structured like a mountain, a square-based pyramid, actually, according to Revelation 21. Just because it has been corrupted by Satan, we shouldn't reject the original idea that's confirmed through the Garden of Eden, that is revealed by God, because it's actually important to understand it. So please reject any bias you might have against pyramids, because we know that they're used in New Age stuff, but because that's a counterfeit. But the fact is, God's original temple blueprint is a pyramid mountain, with God's throne at its peak. And this is important, actually, we're going to find this out later in the series, to understand the scriptures concerning God's ultimate eternal temple, of which all other temples are copies. And I'm talking about the temple of man, the temple of redeemed man in Christ. Now, a wonderful confirmation is that the earthly temple of God, a confirmation that Edom was the original temple, is that God is still going to establish a temple of God in the millennium. And the final earthly temple of God on the earth, before the eternal state, will actually be established during the 1,000-year reign of Christ. And we have many scriptures that describe what this is like. And this earthly temple, as it were, is the penultimate stage. It will be the most glorious temple yet on earth. It's the penultimate stage of God's restoration of man before the eternal state of perfection. And by looking at this final, it's actually the fourth temple of Israel. The first temple was the Temple of Solomon. Then after their captivity in Babylon, there was the second temple, which was beautified by Herod, and that's the second temple was the one in the time of Jesus. The Bible talks about a tribulation temple, a third temple, which will only stand for a short time as an outreach to Israel in the tribulation. That's where the two witnesses will minister from. But then it says when Jesus returns, he is going to establish a fourth temple, and it's going to be a glorious temple. And what we're going to see is it's the restoration of the Eden temple. God is going to restore the earth to what it was like at the beginning. And he's going to restore the Holy Land, the land of Eden, which is actually the land of Israel. He's going to restore it with temple and all, just like it was in the time of Eden. So this is a confirmation that Eden was a temple of God, because we're going to see that when God restores his great temple of God in the millennium, it is exactly patterned in very closely to the original Garden of Eden. And so that will fit perfectly. Okay, so God will achieve in the 1,000-year reign of Christ what he originally planned to do in Eden. From the Holy Land in Eden, with its high mountain and rivers flowing from it, God planned to extend his kingdom of Eden over the whole earth through his obedient people acting as his vice-regents. When this was spoiled by sin, God planned to achieve this purpose through his second Adam, Jesus Christ, bringing the whole world into a state of paradise under his rule. As Adam and Eve were to establish their rule under God across the whole world, so the second Adam, helped by his bride, the church, who will rule and reign with him in these 1,000 years, he will establish his kingdom across the whole earth, a paradise kingdom for 1,000 years. When Christ returns, he's going to restore the earth to what it was like at the beginning before the fall, which is why it's called the regeneration of the earth. Matthew 19:28, Jesus said, "Assuredly I say to you that in the regeneration, when the Son of Man sits on the throne of his glory, you who followed me will sit on the 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel." It's also called the time of restoration of all things, which happens at the second coming of Christ. Acts 3:21, it says to Israel, "Repent, so that God may send Jesus Christ, who was preached to you beforehand, whom heaven must receive until the times of restoration of all things, which God has spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets since the world began." Now all the prophets of God prophesied this glorious coming golden age, this kingdom age, when Christ will actually return, establish his kingdom on earth, and it will be a glorious time, and God will restore the earth. It will be the time of restoration of all things. The earth will be brought back to what it was like in the beginning before the fall, under the second Adam, Jesus Christ. So when Jesus returns, he will restore the earth, and in particular, he will reshape the Holy Land of Eden, which is really the land of Israel, to its former glory. The Holy Land of Israel, at the center of the earth, was actually where Eden was. The flood, you see, totally disrupted the geography of the earth, and that the continents divided after the flood. The strong confirmation of our description of the original Eden with its Mount Eden is that in the millennium, the prophecies tell us that God will restore the earth and will especially reshape the land of Israel to make it like the original land of Eden. Isaiah 51:3, "For the Lord will comfort Zion, he will comfort all her waste places, he will make her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in it, thanksgiving and the voice of melody." Ezekiel 36:35, "So they will say, this land that was desolate has now become like the Garden of Eden." You see, he's going to restore Israel to be like the Garden of Eden. And the rest of the world also will be pretty good. And now it says, and the wasted cities and the desolate cities will be restored. And then all the nations left around you will know that I, the Lord, have rebuilt the ruined places and planted what was desolate. I, the Lord, have spoken it, and I will do it. In particular, God will create a high mountain called Mount Zion, which will be the highest mountain on earth, and it will be the essential of attraction to all the nations of the earth. And it will have the temple of God, a glorious temple, at its peak. And its Holy of Holies will be the throne room from where Christ will reign on the earth, on the throne of David. And Ezekiel 47 describes a river that flows from the Holy of Holies of this temple that will flow then down into the garden city of Jerusalem. And then it will divide into two rivers, which will then flow out to the east and west, watering the land. And we see this in Micah 4. It's also in Isaiah 2. These famous verses. It will really happen. It will happen. It will come to pass. Now, it will come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house. So notice we have a mountain in Israel, and it's the mountain of the Lord's house. That's where the temple will be, at the top of this mountain. Shall be established on the top of the mountains, the highest mountain. It will be exalted above all the hills. And the peoples, that's all the nations, will flow to it. Many nations will come and say, come, let us go up. See, up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house, the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion, so this mountain is called Zion, or Jerusalem as well. It's called Mount Zion. For out of Zion the law will go forth, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Jerusalem's the name for the whole mountain, as well as the city that's on this mountain. He will judge between the nations. So the throne of God will be on this mountain, actually in that temple. And rebuke many people, and they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, nor shall they learn war any more. So God will restore his high holy mountain, where his temple and throne will be, and from which flows living waters. And this then confirms that the original Eden was also a high mountain from which the rivers flowed. Both mountains are the highest on the earth, and that denotes their great holiness as mounts of God. And it's Ezekiel that gives us the detailed description of this millennial mountain. In chapter 37, he says, I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will establish them and multiply them. That's Israel. And I will set my sanctuary, my temple, in their midst forevermore. My tabernacle also will be with them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. The nations also will know that I, the Lord, sanctify, set apart Israel as the holy land. When my sanctuary, so the sanctuary is the source of holiness, of the presence and glory of God, that's going to cover the mountain of the Lord, and it's going to cover the whole of Israel. Now in Ezekiel 40 to 48, he describes this mountain, the Jerusalem, the temple, and it's going to literally come to pass. Verse 2, in the visions of God, he took me into the land of Israel, and he set me on a very high mountain. So Ezekiel was the prophet that actually saw the glory of God leave the temple in his time. And the glory of God never came back into the second temple even. The first temple was destroyed, but God encourages him by showing him this future temple and the glory of God returning to it. And he sees that it's set on a very high mountain. And it says on it, toward the south, is something like the structure of the city. So Ezekiel was actually set down at the very top of this mountain where the temple was, because from this verse to the end of chapter 42, he walks around this temple with an angel measuring out the plan of this temple, and he gives a detailed plan of the temple. So he is looking from the temple, and he sees the city of Jerusalem to the south on lower ground. And this agrees with Psalm 48 that says, great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, that's Jerusalem, in his holy mountain. You see, the city's on the mountain. And from the city, beautiful in elevation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the heights of the north, the city of the great king. And this is really saying that the temple, the center of the holiness, is on the north side of the city. That's how it was in Jerusalem. The Temple Mount was to the north of the city of David, and so it's going to be in that temple. And in Ezekiel 43, it says, he brought me to the gate that faces toward the east. And this is where he sees the glory of God returning to this temple. An awesome moment. Behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east. His voice was like the sound of many waters, and the earth shone with his glory. It was like the appearance of the vision which I saw, like the vision which I saw when I came to destroy the city by the river Chebar, and I fell on my face. He saw the vision of the glory of God leaving the temple. Now he's seeing the vision of the glory of God coming into the temple again by way of the east gate. The Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the temple. And then I heard him, this is the Lord himself now, speaking to me from the temple, that is, speaking from the Holy of Holies, while a man, probably an angel, stood beside me. And he said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne, and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever. So this is saying that the Holy of Holies of the temple, where the Lord was speaking from, is his throne. That is where Christ is going to rule from the top of this mountain on his throne in this fourth temple, which we call Ezekiel's temple. And so we will see as well. Next time we'll give more detail, but it says in verse 12, the whole area surrounding the mountaintop is most holy. This is the law of the temple. And so this was the Holy of Holies up there at the top. And that's where Christ will reign over the earth. And Ezekiel 47, we're going to see this next time. There's a river that flows out of the Holy of Holies, and it flows down into the city of Jerusalem to the south. And then it divides into two rivers, and it flows out from Jerusalem, from the city, which is like the holy place. And one river flows to the east, another river flows to the west. And it's exactly the same picture and pattern as we saw in the Garden of Eden. The heaven, the mountain, the river flowing from the peak of the mountain, and then watering the earth. So we've got more to say about this next time. God bless you.
Thank you for watching. Join with us at Oxford Bible Church every Sunday at 11 AM Greenwich Mean Time for our live stream service. Or join us at Cheney School, Headington, Oxford, OX3 7QA. All Derek Walker's books are available in printed and Kindle versions in all Amazons worldwide, or online with other great products, where you can also support our programmes at www.oxfordbiblechurch.co.uk, or by calling 01865 515 086.